Husband divorced her for being infertile. 30 years later, she gave birth to miracle twins and shut them all up. A great love story of not losing hope. I wrote it for you, so don't miss the story, don't miss the end. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before we begin, allow me to send you a gentle prayer, one that holds your heart like the arms of someone who truly cares. May your soul feel light today, as if the weight of the world is slowly lifting. May peace knock on your door and love slip in quietly when you need it most. I pray your smile returns without effort, and your tears, if they fall, are only the kind that heal. May you be surrounded by kindness and reminded again and again that you matter deeply, to me, to this world, and to God. Now, my sweet family. This story carries something tender. Though it won't be my voice reading, every word was written by me, with care, with emotion, and with all the love I hold for you. James, my brother, will speak it aloud, but I need you to feel my presence in every line. And I want to say something softly, from my heart to yours. Sometimes I wonder, do these messages feel too long to you? I never want to take your time for granted. I just want to greet you with love before the story begins. And if you're visiting this channel for the first time, welcome, beautiful soul. Please don't rush off. Stay a while. Give James one full story, one chance to reach your heart. And if you feel something's missing, you can tell me honestly. I'll always listen. And to my loyal family, I need you today, gently but truly. Please whisper a prayer for me, even just once. And more than anything, please watch the full story. Stay until the very end, not for the numbers, not for the stats, but because this was made for you. Every second holds a piece of my heart. Like the video, leave a small sign of love in the comments. Let me feel your hand in mine, even from far away. Now breathe with me for a moment. Let your heart be open, and let James begin the story. A story written with tenderness and meant to wrap around you.
The moment Tessa Chol walked into that city planning meeting, she owned the room, and Chadwick Walton hated how much he noticed. The late afternoon sun streamed through the towering windows of Manhattan City Hall, casting long shadows across the polished conference table where Tessa sat with perfect posture, her dark eyes blazing with conviction. At 48, she had learned to command attention, not through volume, but through presence. Every line of her tailored burgundy blazer spoke of success, earned through grit and brilliance, not handed down through privilege. Chadwick entered 3 minutes late, a power move he'd perfected over decades of real estate negotiations. But when his steel gray eyes swept the room and landed on her, something shifted in his chest, a flutter he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Mr. Walton, the planning commissioner's voice cut through his momentary distraction. We're ready for your presentation regarding the Riverside Heritage Building. Chadwick straightened his 6'2" frame and moved to the front of the room with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable, his presence commanding. At 52, he had built an empire through calculation and control. Emotions were liabilities he couldn't afford. Ladies and gentlemen, his deep voice filled the space. Progress demands sacrifice. The Riverside building has stood empty for 15 years. My proposal will bring jobs, revenue, and luxury housing to revitalize this neighborhood. He clicked through architectural renderings of gleaming glass towers, his presentation polished and persuasive. But every few seconds, his gaze drifted to the woman in burgundy, noting how her full lips pressed together in obvious disagreement, how her slender fingers gripped her pen like a weapon. When he finished, Tessa rose with fluid grace that made his mouth go dry. Progress. Her voice was honey over steel, rich and warm but sharp enough to cut. Mr. Walton speaks of progress while proposing to destroy a piece of our history. She moved to the front with confident strides, her heels clicking against marble floors. The Riverside building isn't just brick and mortar. It's heritage. It's hope for families who deserve beautiful, affordable homes, not another playground for the wealthy. Chadwick felt his jaw clench as she unveiled her own presentation. Where his was cold efficiency, hers was passionate artistry. She showed renovation plans that preserved the building's ornate facade while creating stunning modern interiors. Her voice never rose, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. This building survived the Great Depression, 2 wars, and decades of neglect, she continued, her gaze meeting his directly. It deserves better than a wrecking ball wielded by someone who sees only dollar signs where others see dreams. The challenge in her tone sent heat racing through his veins, part anger, part something far more dangerous. "Miss Chol," he interjected, rising from his chair with predatory grace, "your passion is admirable, but economics drive reality. Your proposal, while architecturally stunning, lacks the financial foundation to succeed. Vision doesn't pay construction crews. And your glass towers lack humanity, Mr. Walton." She stepped closer, close enough that he caught her scent, jasmine and determination that made his pulse quicken. "Profit isn't everything. Some treasures are worth preserving because they remind us who we used to be." "Nothing matters if it doesn't survive," he countered, moving closer himself until they stood barely 3 feet apart. The tension in the room was electric, every board member forgotten as these two forces faced off. "I deal in what works, not what feels good." "How terribly sad for you." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow hit harder than any shout. "To live in a world where beauty has no value unless it comes with a profit margin." For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across that charged space. Chadwick found himself cataloging details he had no business noticing. The way her dark skin seemed to glow in the afternoon light, how her passionate speech had left her slightly breathless, the intelligence that sparked in her espresso-colored eyes. She was magnificent in her fury, and he wanted nothing more than to discover what she'd be like when that fire turned to passion of an entirely different kind. The spell broke when the commissioner cleared his throat. "Thank you both. We'll review your proposals and announce our decision next week." As the meeting disbanded, Tessa gathered her materials with sharp, efficient movements, clearly annoyed by the outcome. Chadwick found himself approaching despite every rational voice in his head warning him away. "Impressive presentation," he said quietly, close enough to see the slight tremor in her hands, the only sign that their confrontation had affected her as much as it had him. She looked up, suspicion clear in her expression. "Save your condescension, Mr. Walton. We both know you see my work as naive idealism." Actually, he surprised himself by saying, "I see a woman who fights for what she believes in. I respect that, even when I disagree with your methods." Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "And I see a man who's forgotten there's more to life than winning." She paused, studying him with unnerving intensity. "Though I suspect you weren't always this way." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. He had been different once, younger, more passionate, before life taught him that caring too much led only to loss. "People change," he said simply. "Some do," she agreed, slinging her leather bag over her shoulder. "Others just stop trying to feel." She moved to leave, but fate, or perhaps the universe's sense of irony, had other plans. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely as the building's electrical system failed in the storm that had been brewing all afternoon. Emergency lighting cast everything in eerie shadows as thunder crashed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen," a security guard announced, "we're experiencing a power outage. Please remain calm while we—" His words were drowned out by a tremendous groaning sound from somewhere deep in the building's structure. Then the floor beneath their feet began to shake. "Everyone out!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted as people rushed for exits, but Chadwick's attention was locked on Tessa, who had stumbled when the shaking started. Without thinking, he caught her arm, steadying her against his chest. For a moment they were pressed together, her warmth burning through his shirt, her wide eyes reflecting his own shock. "The basement archives," she gasped, looking toward a stairwell where several people had fled. "If the building's structure is compromised..." Another violent tremor sent them both stumbling. Through the windows, they could see debris from the neighboring construction site being hurled by hurricane-force winds. One massive beam crashed through the conference room window just as they made it to the basement stairwell. They were halfway down when the real collapse began. The sound was deafening, metal screaming, concrete crashing, the very bones of the building giving way. Chadwick threw himself over Tessa, driving them both into an alcove between file cabinets, just as tons of debris crashed down behind them. Dust filled the air, making breathing nearly impossible. When the rumbling finally stopped, they found themselves trapped in a pocket of space, barely large enough for two people, surrounded by twisted metal and chunks of concrete. "Are you hurt?" Chadwick's voice was rough with dust and concern. Tessa took inventory, a few scrapes, her blazer torn, but nothing serious. "I'm okay. You?" "Fine." He shifted carefully in their cramped space, trying to give her room while assessing their situation. His phone had no signal. The alcove that had saved them was now their prison. "How long do you think?" she began. "Hours," he said honestly. "Maybe longer." In the dim emergency lighting that had somehow survived, they looked at each other with new eyes. The animosity from their earlier confrontation seemed petty now, replaced by the profound intimacy of survival. They were no longer rivals. They were two souls sharing what might be their final moments. "I'm sorry," Tessa said quietly. "For what?" "For saying you'd forgotten how to feel. That was unnecessarily cruel." Chadwick studied her face in the pale light, noting the way vulnerability softened her features. Maybe it was accurate. His voice was gentler than she'd heard it. "I haven't felt much of anything in a long time." "Because of your wife?" He was surprised she knew, then remembered that business circles in Manhattan were small. "Among other things." He shifted again, accidentally brushing her hand with his. The contact sent electricity up his arm. "What about you?" "No, Mr. Chol. Divorced. Long time ago." She didn't elaborate, but something in her tone suggested old pain. "I've gotten used to being alone." Used to it or chose it? The question hung between them, too honest for comfort, but trapped in this small space with possible death outside their alcove, normal rules no longer applied. "Both, I think," she admitted. "Choosing alone feels safer than being left alone." Understanding passed between them, two people who had built walls around their hearts, who had chosen success over connection, safety over risk. In the space of hours, they had stripped away pretense and found something raw and real beneath. When Chadwick's hand found hers in the darkness, she didn't pull away. When her eyes met his, the heat between them was no longer anger, but something far more dangerous. "Tessa," he said her name like a prayer. "This is crazy," she whispered, but she didn't move away when he leaned closer. "Probably," he agreed, his breath warm against her lips. "Do you care?" Her answer was to close the distance between them, pressing her mouth to his with desperate hunger. The kiss was everything their earlier confrontation had promised, fierce, consuming, electric. Years of loneliness and careful control shattered as they clung to each other in the darkness, tasting hope and desire, and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, they weren't meant to face life alone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the rumble of rescue equipment could be heard above them. "They'll get us out," Chadwick said, but his eyes never left her face. "Yes," Tessa agreed, though she suddenly wasn't sure she wanted to return to a world where they were enemies instead of this, whatever this was. As voices called their names from above, they held each other close, both knowing that everything had changed in the space of a stolen kiss. The building had collapsed around them, but something entirely new was being built between them, something that might prove even more dangerous than falling debris. The question was whether they'd be brave enough to explore it in the harsh light of day. Chapter 2. Enemies to Lovers. 3 days later, Chadwick still tasted her kiss every time he closed his eyes, and it was driving him slowly insane. The rescue had been swift once the emergency crews located them. Paramedics, reporters, concerned colleagues, suddenly they were surrounded by people and noise and the harsh reality of their public lives. In the chaos of being pulled from the debris, Tessa had avoided his eyes, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Now, standing in his corner office overlooking Central Park, Chadwick found himself staring at the newspaper coverage spread across his mahogany desk. There they were in black and white. Local business leaders rescued from building collapse. But the photos captured none of the fire that had burned between them in that dark alcove. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Walton, your 2 o'clock is here." "Send them in," he said, forcing his attention back to quarterly reports that suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the memory of Tessa's lips against his. But instead of his appointment, James walked in, his 28-year-old son, tall and lean, with Sarah's gentle eyes but Chadwick's determined jaw. "Dad." James closed the door behind him, studying his father with concern. "I saw the news. Are you okay?" "Of course." Chadwick straightened his tie, falling back on the armor of control that had served him well for decades. "Minor incident. Nothing that couldn't be handled." James raised an eyebrow, a gesture so reminiscent of his mother that it made Chadwick's chest ache. "Right, because being trapped in a collapsed building is just another Tuesday for you." He settled into the chair across from his father's desk. "The news mentioned you were with Tessa Chol. Isn't she the one trying to block your Riverside development?" "She's an obstacle," Chadwick said carefully, though even the word felt wrong now. Tessa wasn't an obstacle. She was a force of nature that had somehow bypassed every defense he'd spent years building. An obstacle who happens to be brilliant, beautiful, and completely unimpressed by your money. James grinned. "I looked her up. Her firm's portfolio is incredible. She's not just some bleeding heart preservationist, she's genuinely talented." Chadwick's jaw tightened. "Your point?" "My point is that you've been different since Mom died. Closed off, working constantly. When's the last time you went on a date? Had dinner with someone who wasn't a business associate?" James leaned forward. "Maybe this woman is exactly what you need." "James, I'm serious, Dad. You're 52, not dead. And from what I read about Miss Chol, she seems like someone who wouldn't put up with your usual controlling nonsense." Before Chadwick could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Coffee shop on Madison and 67th. 1 hour." His pulse jumped. She'd found his personal number, resourceful as always. "I have to go," he said abruptly, grabbing his jacket. James watched him with knowing eyes. "Give her a chance, Dad. Give yourself one." The coffee shop was crowded, typical for a Thursday afternoon in Manhattan. Chadwick spotted Tessa immediately. She sat in a corner booth, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, wearing a cream-colored sweater that made her skin glow like warm honey. She looked up when he approached, and the jolt of attraction hit him like a physical blow. "You came," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Did you think I wouldn't?" He slid into the seat across from her, noting the way her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. "I wasn't sure. What happened between us?" She paused, searching for words. It was intense circumstances. People do things they wouldn't normally do when they think they might die. Is that what you think happened? He leaned forward, studying her face intently. A moment of panic that meant nothing? Her eyes flashed. There was the fire he remembered. What do you want me to say, Chadwick? That I've been thinking about it constantly? That I can't concentrate on work because I keep remembering how it felt when you kissed me like you were drowning and I was the only air in the world? Good, he said simply, because I haven't been able to think about anything else either. They stared at each other across the small table, the noise of the coffee shop fading into background static. The attraction between them was still there, stronger now if anything, because they'd tasted what it could be. This is insane, Tessa said quietly. We're on opposite sides of a major development deal. Our firms are direct competitors. Getting involved would be complicated, he finished. Yes, it would be. More than complicated. Professional suicide. Probably. She wanted to be frustrated by his calm agreement, but something in his eyes stopped her. There was heat there, yes, but also a vulnerability she hadn't expected from the ice-cold businessman she'd met at City Hall. So what do we do? She asked. Chadwick reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm. We could pretend it never happened, go back to being adversaries, fight over the building until one of us wins and the other loses. We could, she agreed, but she didn't pull her hand away. Or, his thumb traced over her knuckles, we could see where this leads. And the Riverside project? Will work itself out. There are other buildings, other deals. His eyes never left hers. But there's only one you. The words hit her like a sucker punch. When was the last time someone had looked at her like she was more important than a deal? Like she was worth choosing over profit? I don't do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't get involved with men I work with. I don't let people close enough to what? To hurt me. The honesty surprised them both. Chadwick's hand stilled on hers. I know something about being afraid to let people close. They sat in silence for a moment, both recognizing the magnitude of what they were considering. Two people who had built their lives around control and independence, contemplating something that would require them to surrender both. One dinner, Tessa said finally. Somewhere quiet, somewhere we can talk, without half of Manhattan watching. My place, he said immediately, then caught himself. I mean, if you're comfortable with that, I cook, or I used to. She studied his face, seeing past the polished exterior to something raw and hopeful underneath. Okay, but this doesn't mean anything, it's just exploration. Of course, he agreed, though the smile tugging at his lips suggested he thought otherwise. That evening, Tessa stood outside Chadwick's Central Park West penthouse, second-guessing every decision that had led her here. The doorman had recognized her name and sent her up without question, which meant Chadwick had told them to expect her. The thought of that, of him planning for her arrival, sent nervous butterflies dancing in her stomach. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple black dress that was elegant but not too formal, professional but undeniably feminine. Now she wondered if she'd overthought it, if she looked like she was trying too hard, if... The door opened before she could knock, and Chadwick stood there in dark jeans and a midnight blue sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds. He'd clearly showered after work. His hair was slightly damp, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and intoxicating. You came, he said, echoing her words from the coffee shop. I said I would. She stepped inside, trying not to gawk at the stunning space. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, modern art on exposed brick walls, furniture that was clearly expensive but inviting rather than cold. Can I take your coat? She let him slip the cashmere from her shoulders, hyper-aware of his proximity, the brush of his fingers against her neck as he lifted her hair free of the collar. When she turned to face him, they were standing much closer than necessary, and the air between them crackled with possibility. "Something smells amazing," she said, desperate to break the tension before she did something foolish, like rise up on her toes and taste his mouth again. "Salmon with lemon and herbs. Risotto. Nothing too complicated. I'm out of practice." He led her toward the kitchen, a space that was clearly designed for serious cooking but felt warm and lived in. "Wine? Please." He poured 2 glasses of white wine and they moved to the living room while dinner finished cooking. The conversation started cautiously, neutral topics, professional observations, carefully avoiding anything too personal. But as the wine relaxed them both, barriers began to lower. "How long were you married?" she asked, curled into the corner of his leather sofa with her legs tucked under her. 15 years. His expression grew distant. "We met in college. Sarah was gentle, kind. Everything I probably needed at 25. But not at 40? He considered the question seriously. "I think we grew into different people. I became more driven, more focused on building the business. She wanted a quieter life, more family time, children." He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. "You didn't want children." "I thought I did, but I was never there. Always working, always traveling. When she got sick." He stopped, set down his wine glass. "I was in Hong Kong closing a deal when she had her heart attack. By the time I got home, she was gone." Tessa's heart clenched at the raw grief in his voice. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. "I'm sorry." The last thing she said to me was that she felt like she'd been married to a stranger. His fingers tightened on hers. She wasn't wrong. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling between them. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "Your marriage?" 2 years. We were too young, too different. I was obsessed with building my firm, working 18-hour days. Marcus wanted a traditional wife who would prioritize his needs over her own ambitions. She paused, old pain surfacing. "When we found out about the infertility, it just highlighted everything that was already wrong between us. Children were important to you. I thought they were. But maybe I was just afraid of admitting I'd already chosen my career over everything else." She looked up at him. "Maybe we're both just people who love our work more than we know how to love people." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe we just never found the right person to love." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Tessa felt her breath catch as his gray eyes darkened as he leaned slightly closer. "Chadwick." "I know this is crazy," he said, his voice rough. "I know we barely know each other. But I haven't felt this alive in years, Tessa. Since that moment in the debris when you looked at me like I was worth saving." "You were worth saving." "Was I?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Some days I wondered." The vulnerability in his admission broke something open in her chest. This powerful, controlled man was letting her see his wounds, trusting her with his pain. It was more intimate than any physical touch could be. "Yes," she whispered, "you were." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't desperate like their first kiss in the rubble. It was slow, thorough, full of promise and possibility. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his sweater as he explored her mouth with reverent hunger. The timer in the kitchen chose that moment to go off, and they broke apart, both breathing hard. "Dinner," he said, though he made no move to get up. "Yes," she agreed, though she was looking at his mouth like she wanted to devour him instead. He stood slowly, holding out his hand. "Come on, before I forget about food entirely and concentrate on more interesting appetites." The heat in his voice sent desire racing through her veins, but she took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. As they moved toward the kitchen, she realized she was in far more danger than she'd thought. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the terrifying possibility that she was falling for a man who might actually be worth the risk of letting her walls come down. The evening was just beginning, and already she could feel herself changing, softening, becoming someone she hadn't been in years, someone who might be brave enough to choose love over safety. The question was whether they'd both be strong enough to survive what came next. Chapter 3. Dangerous Territory. The morning after their dinner, Tessa woke in her own bed with Chadwick's taste still on her lips, and the dangerous realization that she was already in far deeper than she'd intended. She'd left his apartment at midnight, not because she'd wanted to, but because staying would have meant crossing a line she wasn't ready to cross. The restraint had nearly killed them both. Their goodbye kiss in his doorway had been so intense, so full of banked desire, that she'd practically run to the elevator before she could change her mind. Now, standing in her bathroom mirror, she could see the evidence of their evening together. Lips slightly swollen from kisses, a faint mark on her neck where he'd traced his mouth along her pulse point, eyes that sparkled with a life she hadn't felt in years. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Good morning, beautiful. Last night was incredible. When can I see you again?" Her heart did something acrobatic in her chest. Beautiful. When was the last time someone had called her beautiful and meant it? She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Good morning." Yes, it was. But we need to be careful. Our professional lives can't overlap with whatever this is. His response came immediately. "Understood. Lunch today? Somewhere discreet?" She stared at the message, knowing she should say no, should take time to think this through rationally. Instead, she found herself typing, "Yes." They met at a small bistro in Soho, far from their usual business circles. Chadwick had arrived first and secured a corner table where they could talk without being overheard. When Tessa walked in wearing a forest green dress that clung to her curves, every rational thought fled his mind. "You look stunning," he said as she sat down, his voice rough with appreciation. "Thank you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He'd traded his usual corporate armor for dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look like silver. Less intimidating, more approachable, though no less devastatingly attractive. "I've been thinking," she said after they'd ordered, trying to establish some ground rules before she lost herself entirely in those magnetic eyes. "Dangerous territory," he murmured, but he was smiling. "I'm serious, Chadwick. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, we need boundaries. No one in our professional circles can know. No public appearances together. No meetings that could be misconstrued as business negotiations. You want to keep me as your dirty little secret?" There was amusement in his tone, but something deeper too. A flash of old pain that made her realize how many people had probably hidden their association with him over the years, seeing only his usefulness rather than his worth. "Not a secret," she said softly. "Private. There's a difference. This thing between us, it's ours. I don't want it dissected by gossip columns or business rivals." Understanding flickered in his expression. "You're protecting us. I'm protecting what we're building, whatever that turns out to be." He reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. "What do you think we're building, Tessa?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk. She studied his face, the strong jaw, the intelligent eyes, the mouth that had kissed her senseless just hours ago. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to find out." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern of stolen moments and secret meetings, coffee shops in neighborhoods where they wouldn't be recognized, long walks through Central Park after dark, phone calls that stretched late into the night, their voices growing intimate and warm in the darkness. Chadwick found himself working fewer hours for the first time in years, leaving the office early to meet Tessa for dinner in hidden corners of the city. She introduced him to hole-in-the-wall restaurants where the food was incredible and the atmosphere romantic. He showed her rooftop gardens and private art galleries, places where his money had earned him access but that he'd never shared with anyone else. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their fears, their dreams for the future. Chadwick learned that Tessa had put herself through architecture school, working 3 jobs, that she'd built her firm from nothing through sheer determination and brilliant talent. Tessa discovered that underneath his polished exterior, Chadwick was a man who'd forgotten how to take pleasure in simple things, who worked constantly because he'd never learned how to simply be. "When did you last take a vacation?" she asked one evening as they walked along the Hudson River, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. "Define vacation," he said, his hand warm around hers. "Time off. No phones, no emails, no deals to close." He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Not since before Sarah got sick," he finally said. "Maybe not even then. I always had my phone, always had something that needed my immediate attention. That's not living, Chadwick. That's just existing." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Just existing? I think you're brilliant and passionate and incredibly alive," she said, stepping closer until they were nearly touching. "But I also think you've been sleepwalking through your life for years, using work to avoid feeling things that might hurt." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "And what about you? When did you last do something just for the joy of it? When did you last let yourself be vulnerable with another person?" "I'm being vulnerable with you," she whispered. "Are you?" His eyes searched hers. "Or are you keeping me at arm's length just like you do everyone else?" The accusation stung because it held truth. Even as they grew closer, she could feel herself holding back, protecting the deepest parts of her heart. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much. Of letting you matter to me and then having you decide I'm not worth the complication." The honesty broke something open in his chest. Tessa. Her name was a prayer on his lips as he bent to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "You're not a complication. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years." When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, desire crackling between them like a live wire. "Come home with me," he said against her mouth. "Chadwick, please, I need to show you how much you matter to me. Let me worship you the way you deserve." The raw hunger in his voice sent heat pooling low in her belly. She'd been fighting this attraction for weeks, maintaining careful boundaries. But standing here in his arms with the city sparkling around them, resistance felt impossible. "Yes," she breathed. They barely made it through his apartment door before they were kissing with desperate hunger, months of careful restraint finally shattering. Chadwick backed her against the closed door, his mouth devouring hers while his hands mapped the curves of her body through her dress. "I've wanted this," he panted against her throat, his lips finding the sensitive spot below her ear that made her gasp. "Wanted you. Since that first moment in the planning meeting when you stood up to me like a goddess of fire." "I wanted to slap you," she managed, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt. "I wanted to kiss you until you forgot every argument you'd prepared." His hands found the zipper of her dress, slowly drawing it down. "I still do." The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her in black lace that made his mouth go dry. For a moment, he just looked at her, really looked, taking in every beautiful curve, every elegant line. "You're perfect," he said reverently. "I'm 48 years old," she protested, suddenly self-conscious. "You're magnificent." His hands skimmed her sides, settling at her waist. Every line, every curve, every beautiful inch of you. He lifted her easily, carrying her to his bedroom where moonlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. When he laid her on his bed, she felt like a goddess being worshipped at an altar. Their lovemaking was everything their stolen kisses had promised, passionate, intense, transformative. Chadwick touched her like she was precious, like he was memorizing every response, every sigh. When she arched beneath him, gasping his name, he felt more powerful than any business deal had ever made him feel. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "Yes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It does." "I should go," she said, but made no move to leave his arms. "Stay." His arms tightened around her. "Please, let me wake up with you." She lifted her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes. "Just tonight." "Just tonight," he agreed, though they both knew it was a lie. This wasn't something that could be contained to one night, one stolen moment. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, started something that demanded to be finished. As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, Tessa felt the walls she'd spent years building begin to crumble. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and absolutely inevitable. In the morning, she'd have to face the reality of what they'd started. The professional complications, the personal risks, the fact that she was falling for a man who could destroy everything she'd worked for if this went wrong. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who saw her not as a rival or an obstacle, but as a woman worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth loving. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Dangerous, intoxicating, life-changing hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone worth risking everything for. The morning would bring its own challenges, but for now they had this moment, this perfect stolen piece of forever. And for two people who'd spent years afraid to truly live, it was everything. Chapter 4. Past and present collide. 6 weeks into their secret affair, Tessa realized she was falling in love with a man who still wore his wedding ring, and it was breaking her heart one stolen moment at a time. She noticed it first during a late dinner at an intimate Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from their usual Manhattan haunts. The candlelight caught the platinum band as Chadwick reached for his wine, and suddenly she couldn't focus on anything else. How had she not seen it before? How had she let herself fall so deep without addressing the elephant in the room? "You're wearing your wedding ring," she said quietly, interrupting his story about a difficult client. Chadwick's hand stilled, his eyes following her gaze to his left hand. For a moment, something raw and uncomfortable flickered across his features before he carefully set down his glass. "Yes," he said simply. "After 3 years. After everything we've shared." She tried to keep the hurt from her voice, but failed miserably. "Tessa, what am I to you, Chadwick?" The question burst out of her, fueled by weeks of uncertainty and the growing realization that she'd given her heart to a man who might never be fully available. "Am I just a distraction? A way to feel alive while you stay married to memory?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Around them, the restaurant continued its gentle hum of conversation and clinking silverware, but their table had become an island of tension. "That's not fair," he said, his voice low and tight. "Isn't it? You make love to me like I'm the only woman in the world, but you go home to a shrine to your dead wife. You whisper my name in the dark, but you still wear her ring." Tears threatened, and she blinked them back angrily. "I need to know where I stand because I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt." Chadwick stared at his hands, the weight of the ring suddenly feeling like an anchor dragging him down. "It's not about Sarah," he said finally. "Not anymore." Then what is it about? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bleak with old pain. Guilt, he said simply. The ring reminds me of who I was when she died, a man so consumed with work that he missed every important moment. A husband who was traveling when his wife had a heart attack because closing a deal seemed more important than being home for our anniversary. Tessa's anger began to shift towards something softer, more dangerous. Chadwick. I loved her, he continued, his voice raw. But I wasn't present for her, not really. And now I'm terrified that I'm doing the same thing with you, that I'll get so caught up in the fear of losing you that I'll forget to actually love you properly. The honesty in his confession broke something open in her chest. She reached across the table, covering his hand, the one with the ring, with hers. So take it off, she said gently. Not because you're forgetting her, but because you're choosing to live again. His fingers tightened under hers. What if I hurt you the way I hurt her? What if I'm incapable of being the partner you deserve? What if you're not? She lifted his hand to her lips, pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. What if love isn't about being perfect, but about choosing to try every day? They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Finally, slowly, Chadwick slipped the ring off his finger and placed it in his jacket pocket. I need to tell you something, Tessa said, her own guilt rising like a tide. About my marriage, about why it really ended. Chadwick studied her face, seeing the pain she usually kept so carefully hidden. You don't have to. Yes, I do, because I need you to understand why I'm so scared of this. Of us. She took a shaky breath. Marcus and I weren't just incompatible. I was emotionally distant, completely consumed by my ambitions. I threw myself into work because it was easier than dealing with the growing problems in our marriage. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When we found out about the fertility issues, he wanted us to see a counselor, try to work through everything together. But I was already mentally gone, already building barriers to protect myself from the pain. I chose my career over our relationship, over the chance to fight for what we had. Tessa, he left me for a woman who could give him children, yes, but he also left me for a woman who actually knew how to love someone. Tears finally spilled over, and she wiped them away angrily. I'm terrified that I haven't changed, that I'll do the same thing to you, that when things get difficult, I'll retreat into work and leave you feeling as alone as I left him. Chadwick stood abruptly, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. His hands framed her face, thumbs catching her tears. Look at me, he said fiercely. The woman I've gotten to know these past weeks, passionate, brilliant, vulnerable, that's not someone who's emotionally unavailable. That's someone who's been protecting herself because she's been hurt. How can you be sure? Because you're here, because you're fighting for this instead of running away. His lips brushed hers softly. Because you're brave enough to tell me your worst fears instead of hiding behind walls. The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you either. But maybe that's not what matters. Maybe what matters is that we're both willing to try, to risk everything for the chance at something real. They left the restaurant with a new understanding between them, but the ghosts of their past mistakes followed them home. Over the next week, those old patterns began to surface in insidious ways. Chadwick found himself working late more often, not because he had to, but because success felt safer than vulnerability. When Tessa called during a particularly stressful merger negotiation, he let it go to voicemail, then forgot to call back until the next day. Tessa, meanwhile, threw herself into a preservation project with an intensity that bordered on obsession, staying at the office until midnight and canceling 2 dinner dates with barely an explanation. The collision came on a Friday evening that should have been perfect. They'd planned a weekend getaway to the Hamptons, their first trip together, a chance to be a real couple away from the city's prying eyes. Tessa was packed and waiting in his apartment when Chadwick burst through the door at 9 p.m., still on his phone with a Hong Kong client, his weekend bag nowhere in sight. "I need those contracts reviewed by Monday," he was saying, loosening his tie with one hand while gesturing with the other. "No, I don't care what time it is there. Make it happen." He ended the call and looked up to find Tessa standing by the window, her expression carefully neutral, the same mask she'd worn during their first meeting at City Hall. "We were supposed to leave 3 hours ago," she said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. The Singapore deal is falling apart and I need to fix it. I know." She picked up her weekend bag. "This was a mistake." "Tessa, wait." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I just need an hour to sort this out, then we can go." "An hour?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Chadwick, you've been on the phone for the entire week. When we have dinner, you check emails between courses. When we're in bed, I can see you thinking about contracts and deadlines. That's not true. When's the last time you asked me about my day? Really asked, not just half-listened while you scroll through messages." Her voice remained level, but he could see the hurt underneath. "When's the last time you turned off your phone during dinner?" The questions hit him like arrows finding their mark because he couldn't answer them. Somewhere in the past week, he'd slipped back into old patterns without even realizing it. "I'm building something," he said defensively. "This deal could set us up for what? Another deal? Another distraction from actually living your life?" She moved toward the door. "I'm going home." "Don't do this," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Don't run away because things got complicated." She turned back and he saw tears in her eyes. "I'm not running away. I'm protecting myself from becoming the woman I was before, the one who accepted crumbs of attention and called it love. I won't be Sarah, Chadwick. I won't sit quietly while you choose work over us, over me." The comparison to his late wife was a knife to the chest. "That's not what's happening, isn't it? You took off your ring, but you're still married to your work, still choosing deals over dinner, profits over people." She wiped her tears angrily. "And I'm starting to schedule my life around your availability to make myself smaller so I don't interfere with your real priorities. You are my priority. Then prove it." The challenge hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. "Choose me. Right now. Turn off your phone, cancel your Monday meeting, and come away with me. Show me that I matter more than another deal." For a moment, she saw conflict war across his features, saw him actually consider it. Then his phone buzzed with another call from Hong Kong, and she watched him glance at it automatically. That glance, involuntary, instinctive, told her everything she needed to know. "That's what I thought," she said softly, and walked out of his life. Chadwick stood alone in his apartment, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt cold and empty, holding a phone that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. For the first time in his life, he understood exactly what his late wife had meant when she said she'd been married to a stranger. The question was whether he was brave enough to change, or if he'd lost the best thing in his life to the same patterns that had destroyed his marriage once before. Outside his window, the city sparkled with 1,000,000 lights, each one representing dreams and hopes and chances for connection. But inside his penthouse, Chadwick had never felt more alone. The phone rang again. This time, for the first time in 20 years, he turned it off, but it might already be too late. Chapter 5. Learning to Love. For 3 days, Chadwick lived in a world without color, until he realized that Tessa hadn't just walked out of his apartment, she'd taken his ability to breathe with her. He He'd tried to throw himself back into work, the familiar numbing routine that had gotten him through Sarah's death. But every spreadsheet reminded him of Tessa's criticism about choosing profits over people. Every phone call echoed with her voice, asking when he'd last really listened to her day. Every deal felt hollow, meaningless, like he was rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. On Tuesday evening, he found himself standing outside her architectural firm after hours, watching her silhouette move past the lit windows of her corner office. She was working late again, probably burying herself in projects the same way he'd been doing for years. The irony wasn't lost on him. He almost went in a dozen times, almost called her name when she emerged at nearly midnight, looking exhausted and beautiful and heartbreakingly alone. But what could he say? That he was sorry, that he wanted to change. Words felt inadequate against the weight of his failures. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected visitor to his office. James walked in without waiting for his assistant's permission, taking one look at his father's haggard appearance and settling into the chair across from his desk. "You looked like hell," his son observed. "Thank you for that astute observation." Chadwick didn't look up from the contract he was pretending to read. "When's the last time you slept? Ate something that wasn't delivered?" James leaned forward. "Dad, talk to me. What happened with Tessa?" The mention of her name was like a physical blow. "Nothing happened. We decided it wasn't working." "Bullshit." James's blunt response made Chadwick's head snap up. "I've never seen you as alive as you were these past few weeks. Whatever went wrong, it's fixable." "Some things can't be fixed, James. Only if you're too proud or too scared to try." His son studied him with uncomfortably perceptive eyes. "You're doing it again, aren't you? Hiding behind work instead of dealing with emotions." "I'm not hiding. When Mom was sick, you took on 3 new projects instead of taking time off to be with her. When she died, you immediately flew to Tokyo for a merger that could have waited 6 months. James's voice was gentle but unforgiving. "And now you're doing the same thing with Tessa." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Chadwick wanted to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The 16-hour days, the compulsive deal-making, the way he'd been using work as armor against the pain of losing her. "I don't know how to be different," he admitted quietly. "Start by answering a simple question. Do you love her?" The question should have been easy, but Chadwick found himself staring out his office windows at the city below, remembering the way Tessa's eyes lit up when she talked about preserving beautiful buildings, how she looked curled against him in the early morning light, the sound of her laugh when he said something unexpectedly funny. "Yes," he said finally. "God help me, yes." "Then fight for her. Show her she matters more than any deal, any client, any amount of money." James stood up. "And Dad? Start by clearing your schedule for tonight. All of it." That evening, Tessa was working late again when her assistant knocked on her office door. "There's a delivery for you," Maria said, struggling to hide a smile. "I didn't order anything." Her words died as Maria stepped aside to reveal Chadwick, carrying a large takeout bag, his expression nervous but determined. "I brought dinner," he said simply. "Your favorite, from that little Thai place in Queens you showed me." "Chadwick, please, 5 minutes. If you want me to leave after that, I will." He held up his hands and she noticed something missing, the phone that had been permanently attached to his palm for as long as she'd known him. No phone, no work calls, just dinner and conversation. Against her better judgment, she gestured him into her office. He set the food on her conference table with the careful attention he usually reserved for million-dollar contracts, unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry, jasmine rice and mango sticky dessert. "You remember," she said softly, seeing that he'd ordered exactly what she'd gotten on their first secret dinner date. "I remember everything." His eyes met hers. The way you laugh when you're surprised. How you always steal one bite of my dessert, even when you order your own. The fact that you work late when you're stressed, because creating beautiful things helps you think. She sank into the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted by the effort of staying angry. Why are you here, Chadwick? Because I realized that every success in my life means nothing if I don't have you to share it with. Because I love you more than I loved my fear of losing control. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table between them. I canceled the Singapore deal. Her head snapped up. What? The merger that was consuming my life? I walked away, told them I had discovered something more valuable than expanding my empire. His smile was self-deprecating. Cost me about $50 million and probably confused the hell out of my business partners. Chadwick, that's the best decision I've ever made, because it proved to myself that I could choose differently. That you matter more than money, more than deals, more than the fear of being vulnerable. She stared at him, seeing something different in his posture, his expression. The driven intensity was still there, but it was focused on her now, not on some distant profit margin. Actions, she said quietly. Actions, he agreed. I hired a new VP to handle Asian operations, so I don't have to travel constantly. I promoted my senior associate to partner, so he can take on more of the daily management. I even bought a cabin upstate, somewhere we could go on weekends to just be together. The changes he was describing represented a fundamental shift in how he'd lived his entire adult life. Why? Because being with you taught me the difference between existing and living. Because you make me want to be present for my own life instead of just successful at it. He reached across the table, his fingers barely touching hers. Because I realized that winning every deal means nothing if I lose the woman I love. A tear escaped despite her best efforts. I was so cold to Marcus, so focused on building my firm that I forgot to build our relationship. I'm terrified I'll do the same thing to you, that when things get stressful, I'll retreat into work and leave you feeling as neglected as he did. Then we'll watch for it, together. We'll call each other on it when we start falling back into old patterns. His thumb traced over her knuckles. We'll choose each other every day, even when it's difficult. Every day. Every day. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. Starting with right now. I cleared my entire schedule for the rest of the week. No meetings, no calls, no emergencies that can't wait. Just you and me, learning how to love each other properly. The hope in his voice nearly undid her. This powerful, successful man was offering to restructure his entire life for a chance to love her. It was everything she dreamed of and everything that terrified her. What if we're too damaged? What if we've been alone too long to learn how to be a couple? Then we'll be damaged together. We'll learn together. His free hand came up to cup her cheek. Tessa, I spent 15 years in a marriage where I was physically present but emotionally absent. I won't make that mistake with you. I'd rather fail while trying to love you completely than succeed at keeping you at arm's length. The honesty in his declaration broke down the last of her defenses. I love you too, she whispered. I love you so much it scares me. Good scared or bad scared? The kind of scared that means it matters. That means you matter. She leaned into his touch. The kind that makes me want to be brave enough to try. When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate passion of their early encounters, but something deeper. A commitment, a choice, a beginning. Come home with me, he said against her lips. Let me show you how much you mean to me. Your place or mine? Our place. I bought the cabin in both our names. His smile was tentative but hopeful. I know it's presumptuous, but I wanted you to know that I see a future for us. A real future, not just stolen moments between business trips. The gesture hit her like a wave. He'd bought them a home, a place where they could build something together, away from the pressures and patterns that had nearly destroyed them. "Show me," she said simply. The drive upstate gave them time to talk without the charged atmosphere of his apartment or her office. They discussed boundaries and expectations, fears and hopes, the practical details of building a relationship between two people accustomed to independence. "I want to meet James properly," Tessa said as they wound through tree-lined roads. "Not as your business associate's colleague, but as the woman who loves his father. He'll adore you. He already does, actually. He's been lecturing me about my stupidity for 3 days." Chadwick's hand found hers across the console. "What about your family? Your friends?" "My parents live in Atlanta. They'll be surprised. I haven't brought anyone home in years." She squeezed his fingers. "My business partner thinks I've lost my mind, but she also says I've been happier these past weeks than she's seen me in years." The cabin was perfect, rustic but elegant, surrounded by maple trees just beginning to turn gold with early autumn. Inside, it was clearly meant for two people who enjoyed each other's company. A large fireplace, a kitchen designed for cooking together, a master bedroom with windows overlooking a peaceful lake. "It's beautiful," Tessa said, spinning slowly in the main room. "It's ours," Chadwick corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "A place where we can practice being us without the rest of the world watching." That night, they made love with a tenderness that spoke of new understanding, new commitment. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, watching stars through the skylight, making plans for a future that suddenly seemed not just possible, but inevitable. "I want to wake up next to you every morning," Chadwick murmured against her hair. "In the city, too. Not just here. Everywhere. I want us to be a real couple, Tessa. I want to take you to business dinners and have you complain about boring conversation. I want to attend gallery openings where you explain architecture to me like I'm 5 years old. I want the whole world to know that I'm yours." She lifted her head to look at him, seeing love and certainty shining in his eyes. That's a big change from secret meetings and hidden relationships. "The biggest, but we're worth it." His hands tangled in her hair. "You're worth everything." As she fell asleep in his arms, Tessa felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. They'd both made mistakes, carried baggage, built walls around their hearts. But they'd also chosen to tear those walls down, to risk everything for a chance at real love. It was the scariest, most wonderful thing either of them had ever done. And it was only the beginning. Chapter 6. The walls come down. 3 months into their new commitment, Tessa stood in the bathroom of Chadwick's penthouse, staring at herself in the mirror and trying to calm the butterflies performing aerial acrobatics in her stomach. Tonight was the night. After weeks of careful planning and gentle coaxing from Chadwick, she was finally going to meet Sarah's parents. The idea terrified her in ways that facing down hostile city planning boards never had. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," Chadwick said from the doorway, his voice warm with affection and understanding. She turned to find him watching her with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much, wearing a charcoal suit that made him look devastatingly handsome and completely at ease. Of course, he was calm. These people had loved him like a son for over 20 years. "What if they hate me?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her for days. "They won't hate you." He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders as he met her gaze in the mirror. "They might be cautious at first. They loved Sarah deeply. But they also love me and they want me to be happy. But I'm so different from her." Tessa leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Sarah was gentle, traditional. I'm not." No, you're passionate and brilliant and strong enough to challenge me when I need it." His lips brushed her temple. "They're going to see what I see, a woman who's brought me back to life." She turned in his arms, studying his face. Over the past months, the changes in him had been profound. The driven intensity was still there, but it was tempered now with presence, with an ability to be fully in the moment instead of constantly planning 3 moves ahead. He laughed more easily, touched her more freely, had learned to silence his phone during dinner, and actually listen when she talked about her day. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm too much?" "Tessa." His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You are never too much. You're exactly enough for me, for anyone lucky enough to really know you." He kissed her softly. "Besides, Margaret and Robert are wonderful people. If they weren't, Sarah wouldn't have been the kind woman I married." The restaurant Chadwick had chosen was elegant, but not intimidating, the kind of place where conversations could happen without shouting over noise or feeling rushed by ambitious servers. Tessa spotted them immediately at a corner table, an attractive couple in their 70s, him distinguished with silver hair and kind eyes, her petite with Sarah's gentle smile. "Chadwick." Margaret rose with obvious delight as they approached, embracing him warmly before turning expectant eyes to Tessa. "Margaret, Robert, I'd like you to meet Tessa Chole." Chadwick's hand was warm and steady at the small of her back. "Tessa, these are Sarah's parents, though they've been family to me longer than almost anyone." "It's so wonderful to finally meet you," Margaret said, her smile genuine and warm. "Chadwick has told us so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Tessa replied, accepting Margaret's offered hug with surprise and gratitude. "Very good things," Robert confirmed, shaking her hand with the firm grip of a man who'd spent his life in construction. "Though he failed to mention how beautiful you are." They settled into easy conversation over appetizers, Margaret asking thoughtful questions about Tessa's work, Robert sharing stories about restoration projects he'd managed over the years. The ice began to thaw as Tessa found herself genuinely engaged, her nervousness fading in the face of their obvious warmth. "Sarah would have loved your Riverside project," Margaret said as their main courses arrived. "She was always passionate about preserving history, making sure beautiful things weren't lost to progress." The mention of Sarah created a moment of silence that could have been awkward. Instead, Tessa felt an unexpected sense of connection. "Chadwick told me she was an advocate for historic preservation," Tessa said carefully. "I would have loved to meet her, to hear her thoughts on adaptive reuse." "She would have appreciated your approach," Robert said thoughtfully. Sarah believed that the past and future could coexist beautifully when someone cared enough to make it work. Over the course of the evening, Sarah's presence at the table wasn't a barrier, but a bridge. Her parents shared stories that painted a picture of a woman who'd been deeply loved, but who'd also worried about Chadwick's inability to balance work and life. "After she died, we were so concerned about him," Margaret confided as they shared dessert. "He just disappeared into his work. We'd call and he'd be traveling. We'd invite him for holidays and he'd have a deadline that couldn't wait." "I was running," Chadwick admitted quietly, his hand finding Tessa's under the table. "From the guilt, from the loneliness, from having to face how much I'd taken for granted." "Sarah knew you loved her," Robert said firmly, "but she also knew you didn't know how to be present for that love. It worried her. Not because she doubted your feelings, but because she wanted you to learn how to truly live. She used to say," Margaret added with a sad smile, "that she hoped someday you'd find someone strong enough to teach you that success without connection was just another kind of failure." The words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity. Tessa felt tears threaten as she understood what Margaret was really saying. That Sarah would have wanted this for him, would have wanted him to find love again. "I think," Margaret continued, reaching across the table to squeeze Tessa's hand. "She would be very grateful that you've helped him remember how to be happy." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the emotional weight of the evening. It wasn't until they were back in Chadwick's apartment that Tessa finally spoke. "They miss her," she said, curled against him on the sofa. "Every day. But they're not stuck in the past the way I was." His arms tightened around her. "They want me to move forward, to build something new while honoring what came before." "Like adaptive reuse," Tessa said with a small smile. "Taking something beautiful from the past and making it part of a living future." "Exactly like that." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "They love you, by the way." Margaret asked if I was planning to propose. Tessa's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm still working up the courage to deserve you." His voice was rough with emotion. "But that I'm hoping you'll be patient while I figure out how to love you the way you should be loved." She lifted her head to meet his gaze, seeing vulnerability and hope warring in his expression. "Chadwick, I know it's too soon to talk about marriage. I know we're still learning how to be together. But I need you to know that this isn't casual for me. You're not a rebound or a midlife crisis." His hands tangled in her hair. "You're my future, if you'll have me." The declaration sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "I want that future," she whispered. "I want everything with you." Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. The kiss of two people who'd found their way home to each other after years of wandering alone. A week later, it was Tessa's turn to introduce Chadwick to her world. Her business partner, Diana, had been dying to meet the man who'd transformed her usually serious colleague into someone who hummed while reviewing blueprints and actually left the office before 8 p.m. "So you're the mysterious mogul," Diana said when they met for lunch at a trendy Soho bistro. She was a petite blonde with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, the kind of woman who could reduce hostile contractors to stammering apologies with a single raised eyebrow. "Guilty as charged," Chadwick replied with the easy charm that had served him well in countless business negotiations. "Good. I was afraid you might be boring." Diana turned to Tessa with a grin. "He's prettier than you described." "Diana," Tessa warned, but she was smiling. "What?" "I'm just saying that if you're going to have a midlife romance with a powerful man, you might as well make sure he's easy on the eyes." Diana studied Chadwick with the analytical gaze she usually reserved for structural engineering reports. "Though I'm more interested in whether he makes you happy than whether he's photogenic." "He does," Tessa said simply, her hand finding Chadwick's across the table. "Happier than I knew I could be." "Good, because I've known Tessa for 8 years, and I've never seen her like this. Usually she's all business, all focus, all work. These past few months, she's actually been fun." Diana's expression grew serious. "Don't mess this up, Walton. She doesn't give her heart easily, but when she does, it's completely. If you hurt her, I'll use my engineering degree to ensure your buildings fall down." "Noted," Chadwick said gravely, though his eyes sparkled with amusement. "Though I should mention that I have no intention of hurting her. Ever." "We'll see," Diana said, but her smile had softened. "Anyone who can make Tessa glow like she's been doing has my provisional approval." Later that evening, as they walked through Central Park hand in hand, Tessa marveled at how seamlessly Chadwick had fit into her life. He charmed Diana, impressed her other colleagues at the lunch that followed, and somehow made her feel like introducing him wasn't a risk but a celebration. "Diana likes you," she said as they paused by the reservoir, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered stars. "Good. Her opinion matters to you." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Though I'm more concerned with yours." "Mine?" She leaned back against his chest, feeling utterly content. "I think you're pretty wonderful." just pretty wonderful. She turned in his arms, seeing the playful challenge in his eyes. Okay, completely wonderful, devastatingly handsome, surprisingly funny when you're not being an intimidating business mogul. Better, he murmured, bending to kiss her neck. What else? Patient, kind, generous with your heart once someone gets past all those walls you've built. Her voice grew serious. You make me feel like I'm enough, just as I am, like I don't have to choose between success and love. You are enough, more than enough. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. As they stood there in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by the city they both loved, Tessa felt something shift inside her chest. The last of her walls were coming down, not because she was forced to tear them down, but because she no longer needed them. With Chadwick, she was safe to be vulnerable, safe to be fully herself. And for a woman who'd spent years protecting her heart behind professional success and careful distance, that safety was the greatest gift of all. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges. There always were when two strong-willed people built a life together. But they'd face them as partners, as equals, as two people who'd chosen to risk everything for the chance at something extraordinary. Standing in his arms with the city sparkling around them, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Home wasn't a place. It was this man who saw her completely and loved her anyway, who'd taught her that the greatest courage wasn't in building defenses, but in choosing to be open despite the risks. They were building something beautiful together, something that would last. And for the first time in her life, Tessa wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. Chapter 7: Unexpected Gift. Tessa stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, certain that 25 years of accepting infertility had prepared her for exactly nothing. The plus sign stared back at her, impossibly bright against the white plastic, as real and shocking as if someone had just announced that gravity had reversed itself. At 48, after decades of believing her body incapable of this miracle, she was pregnant with Chadwick's child. The bathroom of their upstate cabin suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, the test still clutched in her shaking fingers, and tried to process what this meant for everything they'd built together. They'd been so careful about other things, defining their relationship, blending their lives, learning to love each other properly. But this had never even entered their conversations because it had seemed impossible. At 48, with a history of infertility, pregnancy had been as likely as winning the lottery. Tessa, Chadwick's voice came through the door, warm with concern. Everything okay in there? You've been quiet since we got back from the clinic. The clinic. She'd gone for what she'd thought was a routine physical, mentioning to Dr. Martinez that she'd been feeling unusually tired, slightly nauseous in the mornings. When the doctor had suggested a pregnancy test just to rule it out, Tessa had laughed. She wasn't laughing now. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. How did you tell the man you loved that everything you thought you knew about your future had just changed irrevocably? Tessa, I'm coming in. The door opened and Chadwick stepped inside, his gray eyes immediately finding hers and widening at whatever he saw in her expression. What's wrong? He was beside her instantly, kneeling in front of the bathtub, his hands reaching for hers. Are you hurt? Sick? Wordlessly, she held out the pregnancy test. For a moment, Chadwick just stared at it, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. When his eyes finally met hers, they were bright with unshed tears. You're pregnant, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm pregnant, she confirmed, and suddenly the reality of it hit her like a tidal wave. Tears began flowing before she could stop them. Tears of shock, of joy, of terror, of everything in between. "Oh, sweetheart." Chadwick gathered her into his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. "It's okay. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." "I don't know what I'm feeling," she sobbed. "Happy, terrified, confused. I thought this was impossible. Dr. Martinez says it happens sometimes, late fertility, especially with donor eggs from the IVF procedure I did last year during our separation." She felt him stiffen slightly. "How is that possible? Remember when I told you Marcus and I had fertility issues? It turned out the problem was primarily his low sperm count, though I had some age-related concerns too. After our divorce, I never pursued it further." She took a shaky breath. "Dr. Martinez says that sometimes, with the right partner and optimal timing, what seemed impossible can happen naturally. My hormone levels have actually improved since we've been together. Less stress, better health, real happiness." "You wanted a baby," he said softly, understanding flooding his expression. "I wanted our baby," she corrected, her hand covering his on her stomach. "Even when I thought I'd lost you, part of me was hoping for this miracle, and somehow the universe gave us exactly what we needed. But now, Chadwick, I'm 48 years old. The risks, the complications are manageable," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." His hands moved to her still flat stomach with reverent wonder. "There's a baby in there, our baby." The possessive warmth in his voice sent a new wave of emotion through her. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy?" He laughed, though his eyes were still bright with tears. "Tessa, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. I was a terrible father to James, always working, always distant. But with you, with this baby, I want to do better. I want to be present for every moment." She searched his face, seeing truth there alongside the fear. "What if something goes wrong? The statistics for pregnancy at my age. Then we'll deal with it, together." He pressed his forehead against hers. "But what if everything goes right? What if we get to raise a child together, to create a family?" The hope in his voice was intoxicating and terrifying. "I never thought I'd have this chance." "Neither did I. After Sarah, I assumed I was done with family life, that I'd missed my opportunity to be a real father." His hand spread across her stomach. "But maybe this is the universe giving us both a second chance." They held each other in the small bathroom, processing the magnitude of what had just changed between them. Outside, the lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, peaceful and eternal, while inside their private sanctuary, everything had shifted. "We should call Dr. Martinez," Tessa said eventually. "Set up prenatal care, discuss the risks." "We will," Chadwick agreed. "But right now, can we just be amazed? Can we take a moment to celebrate this miracle before we start worrying about everything that could go wrong?" She looked at him, this strong, successful man who was looking at her like she'd just handed him the moon, and felt some of her fear transform into wonder. "You really want this?" she said, not quite a question. "I want everything with you. Marriage, babies, growing old together, fighting about whose turn it is to take out the garbage." His smile was soft and full of love. "But mostly, I want the chance to love this child the way I should have loved James when he was young." That evening, they drove back to the city in comfortable silence, hands linked across the console, both lost in thoughts of the future that had just become infinitely more complicated and beautiful. "We should tell James," Chadwick said as they pulled into his parking garage. "Tonight? If you're comfortable with it. He's always wanted siblings. I think he'll be thrilled to finally get one, even if he's 28 years older." They found James in Chadwick's apartment, raiding the refrigerator with the casual entitlement of a son who'd grown up visiting this space. "Perfect timing," he said, emerging with leftover Thai food. "I was about to order pizza, but this is better." He paused, studying their faces. "You both look weird. Good weird, but weird. What's going on?" Chadwick looked at Tessa, who nodded encouragingly. "James," Chadwick began, "Tessa and I have some news." "You're getting married." James's face lit up. "Finally. I was wondering when you'd make it official." "We're having a baby," Tessa said quietly. The container of pad thai slipped from James's hands, landing on the marble floor with a splat that none of them noticed. "A baby," he repeated slowly. "As in, a human infant." "That's generally what the term implies," Chadwick said dryly. "But Tessa, aren't you?" James caught himself, his cheeks reddening. "I mean, not that you're old, but 48, Tessa supplied with amusement. "And yes, it's unusual, but not impossible, apparently." James stood frozen for a moment, processing. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Tessa had ever seen. "I'm going to be a big brother." He swept Tessa into a careful hug, then turned to his father. "Dad, this is incredible. A chance to do it right this time." "I was thinking the same thing," Chadwick said, emotion thick in his voice. "Though I have to say," James continued with a grin, "this kid is going to have the weirdest family tree. A brother old enough to be his father, parents who met as business rivals, and enough generational gaps to confuse genealogists for decades." Despite her nervousness, Tessa found herself laughing. "It's going to be complicated." "The best families usually are," James said seriously. "Besides, this baby will have more love than most kids could ever hope for. Dad's finally learned how to be present. You're brilliant and strong enough to keep him in line, and I'm going to be the coolest big brother in history." The simple acceptance and joy in his response made Tessa's heart swell. This was what family looked like, not perfect people or ideal circumstances, but love and support, and the willingness to embrace change together. That night, as they lay in bed with Tessa's head on Chadwick's chest, they talked about the future in ways they never had before. "I want to marry you," Chadwick said into the darkness. "Not because you're pregnant, but because I can't imagine facing any of this without you as my wife." "Because of the baby?" she asked, though her heart was already saying yes. "Because I love you. Because you're my partner in everything. Because I want our child to grow up seeing what real love looks like." His hand found hers in the darkness. "The baby just makes it more urgent. I want us to be a family in every sense of the word." "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to be your wife. Yes, I want us to raise this child together." She lifted her head to meet his eyes in the dim light. "Yes, to all of it." When he kissed her, it was with a reverence that spoke of new beginnings and second chances. They made love slowly, carefully, with the wonder of knowing they'd created life together, that their bodies had somehow managed to make a miracle neither of them had thought possible. Afterwards, Chadwick's hand rested on her still flat stomach while they talked about nurseries and names, about the kind of parents they wanted to be, about the love they'd pour into this unexpected gift. "I'm scared," Tessa admitted in the quiet darkness. "So am I," Chadwick replied. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe with anyone else." Outside their window, the city sparkled with possibility. Inside their bedroom, two people who'd thought their chance at family had passed them by held each other close and marveled at the miracle growing between them. At 48 and 52, they were about to become first-time parents together. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. They'd built something beautiful from the ruins of failed marriages and broken dreams. Now they were about to add the most precious piece of all, a child who would be living proof that it's never too late for love to transform everything. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright with promise. And for the first time in either of their lives, they were ready for whatever came next. Together. Chapter 8. Growing Together. At 12 weeks pregnant, Tessa discovered that morning sickness was a cruel misnomer, especially when it struck during the middle of a crucial client presentation. She barely made it to the ladies' room before her stomach rebelled, leaving her gripping the marble sink and wondering how women throughout history had managed to function while growing human beings. When she emerged 10 minutes later, pale but determined, she found Chadwick waiting in the hallway with a bottle of ginger ale and worry etched across his features. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "You're green," he countered, his hand warm against her lower back. "Maybe we should reschedule with the Hendersons." "Absolutely not." She straightened her shoulders, accepting the ginger ale gratefully. "This is the biggest preservation contract of the year. I'm not letting pregnancy interfere with my career." Something flickered across his expression, understanding mixed with frustration. Over the past month, they'd had this conversation in various forms. Tessa determined to prove that pregnancy wouldn't make her weak or unreliable, pushing herself harder than ever. Chadwick, equally determined to protect her and their unborn child, hovering with an intensity that was both touching and suffocating. "No one expects you to work through severe nausea, Tessa." "I expect me to." She softened her tone, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "I know you're worried, but I need to do this. For me, for us, for this baby who's going to have a mother who doesn't let biology derail her ambitions." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you need to step out again, you'll handle it gracefully and professionally." She rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "Because you're amazing at what you do, and because I trust you completely." The Henderson presentation went flawlessly, partly because Tessa's passion for the project overrode her physical discomfort, and partly because Chadwick seamlessly stepped in during the moments when she needed to collect herself. Watching him field technical questions and support her vision without overshadowing her expertise, she fell a little more in love with him. "We make a good team," she said as they walked to their car afterwards, the contract signed and the future of a 19th century courthouse secured. "The best," he agreed, helping her into the passenger seat with the careful attention he'd been lavishing on her since the pregnancy began. "Though I still think you're pushing too hard. And I think you're worrying too much." She caught his hand as he settled behind the wheel. "Chadwick, I love that you want to protect us, but I need you to trust that I know my body, that I know my limits. I do trust you. It's the rest of the world I don't trust." His thumb traced over her knuckles. "I see how people look at you differently now that word is getting out about the pregnancy. Like you're suddenly fragile, incapable of the same level of excellence." She was quiet for a moment, processing his observation. He wasn't wrong. There had been subtle shifts in how some colleagues treated her, an assumption that pregnancy automatically meant diminished capacity. "Then we prove them wrong," she said finally. "Together, we show them that pregnancy is a condition, not a disability, and that women can grow babies and build empires simultaneously." His smile was soft and proud. "God, I love your fight. Good thing, since you're stuck with me for the next 50 years. Their engagement had been announced quietly, without fanfare or society page coverage. They'd chosen a simple setting, dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation, Margaret and Robert joining them as the only witnesses. When Chadwick had slipped the vintage Art Deco ring onto her finger, Tessa had felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Now, at 16 weeks, they were finally ready to share their joy more widely. The engagement party was small and elegant, held in the rooftop garden of Chadwick's building, with Manhattan sparkling below them. Diana cornered Tessa by the champagne fountain, her own glass filled with sparkling cider in solidarity. "You're glowing," she observed, studying Tessa's face with the keen eye of a longtime friend. "And not just the pregnancy glow, though that's definitely there. You look settled, content in a way I've never seen. I am settled. Tessa touched her barely visible bump, still amazed that life was growing there. For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I want to be. Even with all the complications, the age thing, the health risks, the way this industry treats pregnant women, especially with the complications. Tessa watched Chadwick across the garden, deep in conversation with James and a group of their friends. Love isn't about finding someone who makes life easy. It's about finding someone who makes the hard parts worth it. Across the party, Chadwick was having a similar conversation with his son. "You look different," James observed, following his father's gaze to where Tessa stood with Diana. "Lighter, like you're finally living instead of just existing." "That's exactly what it feels like," Chadwick admitted. "For years after your mother died, I was going through the motions, working, traveling, making money, but never really present for any of it. And now I can't wait to wake up every morning, to see how Tessa's feeling, to talk about nursery colors, to feel the baby kick." His voice grew soft with wonder. "Yesterday she felt the first movement, just a flutter, but when she put my hand there..." He trailed off, emotion thick in his throat. "Dad," James put a hand on his father's shoulder, "you know I'm proud of you, right? Of how you've changed, how present you are now. I hope I can be the father to this baby that I should have been to you. You were the father you knew how to be then. This baby will get the father you've learned to be now." James smiled. "Besides, they'll have the benefit of the coolest big brother in the world to teach them all the things you're too old to remember." At 20 weeks, they learned they were having twins. Tessa lay on the examination table, gel cold on her rounded belly, watching the ultrasound monitor with fascination and growing amazement. Dr. Martinez moved the wand with practiced efficiency, pointing out tiny features that looked like abstract art to Tessa's untrained eye. "There's baby A," the doctor said, indicating a blur of black and white on the screen. "Heart rate looks excellent, and baby B is..." She moved the wand slightly. "Right there, also looking perfect." "Baby B," Tessa's voice came out as a squeak. "Congratulations, doctor," Martinez said with a warm smile. "You're having twins." Tessa turned to look at Chadwick, who had gone completely still beside the examination table. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Twins," he repeated as if testing the word. "Two babies," Tessa confirmed, her own voice breathless with amazement. "Chadwick, we're having two babies." For a moment she worried he might faint. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen, and he was laughing. Deep, joyful laughter that filled the small room. "Twins," he said again, leaning down to kiss her thoroughly. "Of course it's twins. We don't do anything halfway, do we?" "Apparently not," she managed, still staring at the monitor where two tiny hearts beat in perfect rhythm. The drive home was quiet, both of them processing this new development. 2 cribs instead of 1, 2 college tuitions, 2 teenagers simultaneously. The practical considerations were staggering. "Are you okay?" Tessa asked as they pulled into their parking garage. "I'm terrified," Chadwick admitted, "and completely thrilled, and wondering how we're going to manage 2 babies when I was already nervous about 1. Together," she said simply, "the same way we've managed everything else, together." That night, they redesigned the nursery plans, researching twin pregnancies and double strollers and the logistics of feeding 2 infants simultaneously. It should have been overwhelming, but instead Tessa felt a deep sense of rightness. This was their family, unconventional, unexpected, absolutely perfect in its chaos. "I have a confession," Chadwick said as they lay in bed, his hand spanning her growing belly. "I've been reading pregnancy books." "Just now finding that out?" "I've seen the stack on your nightstand. Not just reading them, memorizing them. I know the week-by-week development. the warning signs to watch for, the best positions for twin delivery. His voice grew soft. I missed so much with James. Every milestone, every doctor's appointment, every moment that mattered. I refused to miss anything with them. You won't, she assured him, covering his hand with hers. You're going to be an incredible father to these babies. We're going to be incredible parents, he corrected. Tired, overwhelmed, completely in over our heads, but incredible. At 24 weeks, they finally had the nursery ready. What had started as one room had expanded to include a sitting area where they could feed babies in the middle of the night, a changing station that looked more like mission control, and enough baby gear to stock a small store. We may have gone overboard, Tessa observed, surveying the beautiful chaos they'd created. Probably, Chadwick agreed, assembling the second crib with the focused intensity he usually reserved for major negotiations. But they're going to be the most well-equipped babies in Manhattan. She watched him work, noting the way his hands moved with careful precision, the concentration on his face as he followed the instructions step by step. He approached fatherhood the same way he approached everything else, with thorough preparation and absolute commitment. Talk to them, she said suddenly. What? The babies. Dr. Martinez says they can hear us now. Talk to them. Chadwick set down the Allen wrench and moved to where she sat in the rocking chair they'd chosen together, wide enough for two people, perfect for late-night feedings and stolen moments of peace. What do I say? Whatever you want them to know. He knelt beside the chair, his hands resting gently on her rounded belly. For a moment he was quiet, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was soft and full of love. Hi, little ones. It's your dad. He paused, as if giving them time to respond. I know you can't understand me yet, but I want you to know that you're already so loved. Your mom is the strongest, most amazing woman in the world, and she's taking such good care of you both. Tessa felt tears threaten as one of the babies kicked against his palm. Then the other joined in, as if responding to his voice. That's baby A, she said softly. They always respond to your voice. Is that right? Wonder filled his expression. We're going to have so much fun together. I'm going to teach you about buildings and business and how to change the world. Your mom is going to teach you about beauty and creativity and standing up for what matters. His voice grew thick with emotion. And we're both going to love you more than you can possibly imagine. As if in response, both babies began moving, creating ripples across her belly that made them both laugh. I think they approve, Tessa said, wiping away happy tears. I think they're going to be trouble, Chadwick replied, but his smile was pure joy. The best kind of trouble. That night, as they lay in their bed with the completed nursery just down the hall, Tessa marveled at how completely their lives had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a successful but lonely woman who'd given up on the idea of family. Now she was engaged to the love of her life, growing twins who were already showing their personalities, preparing to become a mother at 48. No regrets? Chadwick asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. None, she said immediately. You? Only that it took us so long to find each other. His arm tightened around her. But maybe we needed to be who we are now to make this work. Maybe younger versions of ourselves wouldn't have appreciated what we have. She considered this, thinking about the driven, emotionally closed woman she'd been even a year ago. You might be right. We had to learn how to love ourselves before we could love each other properly. And now? Now we get to love these babies the way we wished we'd been loved. Present, attentive, willing to put family before everything else. She felt one of the twins shift, settling more comfortably against her ribs. They're going to be so lucky. We're the lucky ones, Chadwick corrected, his hand finding her belly in the darkness. 2 miracles we never thought we'd have. As she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by love and possibility, Tessa felt nothing but gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought them here. The pregnancy hadn't been easy. The nausea, the fatigue, the constant worry about complications at her age. But every difficult moment had been worth it for this feeling of complete rightness, of family, of home. In just a few months, they'd be parents. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. But she couldn't wait to meet the two little people who were already changing everything about their world. They were building more than a family. They were building a legacy of love that would last generations. And that was worth every sleepless night, every worried moment, every challenge that lay ahead. Their love story was becoming a family story, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Chapter 9. The Ultimate Test. At 35 weeks pregnant with twins, Tessa woke up in the hospital thinking she was having the worst hangover of her life, until she realized the pounding in her head came with dangerously high blood pressure and the very real possibility of losing everything. "Mrs. Walton," Dr. Martinez's voice cut through the fog of Tessa's confusion. "You're in the hospital. You had a seizure at home this morning. Do you remember?" Tessa tried to focus, but her vision was blurry and her head felt like it might explode. Fragments came back, getting out of bed. Sudden dizziness, Chadwick's panicked voice calling 911, then darkness. "The babies," the words came out slurred but urgent, "are okay for now. But Tessa, you have severe preeclampsia. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and we need to monitor you very closely." Through her haze, she became aware of Chadwick beside her bed, his hand gripping hers like a lifeline. When she turned toward him, his face was ashen with fear. "You scared me," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "You were unconscious for 20 minutes. How long do I have to stay here?" she asked Dr. Martinez, though part of her already knew the answer wouldn't be what she wanted to hear. "Until we deliver the babies. Probably several weeks. Bed rest, constant monitoring, medications to control your blood pressure." The doctor's expression was kind but firm. "This is serious, Tessa. We're talking about your life and the lives of your children." The next few days passed in a blur of medical terminology and mounting concern. Chadwick had essentially moved into her hospital room, conducting business from the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, taking calls in whispered tones so as not to disturb her rest. "You don't have to stay here constantly," Tessa said one afternoon, watching him struggle to review contracts on his laptop while keeping one eye on her monitors. "Yes, I do." His tone brooked no argument. "Where else would I be? Running your company, closing deals, living your life." He set the laptop aside and moved to the edge of her bed, taking her hand carefully. "Tessa, you and these babies are my life. Everything else is just details." The simple declaration broke something open in her chest. This was the man she'd once accused of choosing work over love, now sleeping in hospital chairs and canceling international trips without a second thought. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." His thumb traced over her knuckles. "But we're going to get through this. All four of us." 3 weeks into her hospital stay, James visited during his lunch break, bringing real food to supplement the hospital's attempts at nutrition. "Dad looks terrible," he observed, unpacking Chinese takeout while Chadwick was in a meeting with her doctors. "He won't leave," Tessa said, grateful for the familiar comfort of James's presence. "I've tried to convince him to go home, shower in his own bathroom, sleep in a real bed. He won't leave because he's finally learned what matters." James settled into the visitor's chair, studying her with eyes that reminded her so much of his father's. "He told me yesterday that missing Mom's heart attack was the worst mistake of his life. He's not making that mistake again. But this could go on for weeks. Then he'll be here for weeks." James smiled. "Tessa, I've never seen my father like this. Completely present, utterly focused on what really matters. You've changed him." Before she could respond, Chadwick returned with Dr. Martinez, both wearing expressions that made Tessa's heart rate spike on the monitors. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Your blood pressure is getting harder to control," Dr. Martinez said gently. "We may need to deliver the babies sooner than we hoped." "How much sooner?" "Possibly within the next few days. They'll be premature, but 38 weeks is much better than 35. We have an excellent NICU team." "NICU?" Tessa's voice cracked. The idea of her babies needing intensive care sent panic flooding through her system. "It's standard for twins born this early," Chadwick said, though she could see the fear in his eyes. "They'll be small but strong, just like their mother." That night, Tessa couldn't sleep despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Every flutter from the babies felt significant, every change in her body a potential warning sign. "Talk to me," she said to Chadwick, who was reading in the chair beside her bed. "Tell me about the first time you held James." A soft smile crossed his features. "I was terrified. He was so small, so perfect. Sarah had to show me how to support his head properly." His expression grew distant. "I was already thinking about college funds and business plans for his future. I missed the whole point, which was that he was perfect exactly as he was in that moment, that holding him should have been enough." He reached for her hand. "I won't make that mistake with these two. I'm going to be present for every single moment." At exactly 38 weeks and 2 days, Tessa's blood pressure spiked beyond the point of medication control. She woke to organized chaos, nurses moving quickly, monitors beeping urgently, Dr. Martinez explaining that they needed to deliver immediately. "Emergency C-section," the doctor was saying. "Tessa's having another seizure. We need to get these babies out now." Through the haze of medication and medical urgency, Tessa was dimly aware of Chadwick's hand in hers, his voice promising that everything would be okay, that he loved her, that she just needed to fight. Then everything went dark. Chadwick had never felt more helpless than in the moments when doctors worked frantically to save his wife and children while he stood uselessly by, holding Tessa's unconscious hand and praying to any deity who might be listening. "Mr. Walton," a nurse appeared beside him, "we need you to make some decisions." The next hour was a blur of consent forms and medical choices he felt wholly unqualified to make. When the cries of the first baby filled the operating room, followed quickly by the second, he wept with relief and terror in equal measure. "2 girls," Dr. Martinez announced, "small but breathing on their own. And Tessa, stable. The pressure should normalize now that the babies are delivered." They wheeled the tiny, perfect girls past him toward the NICU, so small they could each fit in one of his hands, but absolutely beautiful. When Tessa was moved to recovery, still unconscious but breathing steadily, Chadwick finally allowed himself to believe they might all survive this. Tessa woke hours later to find Chadwick asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers, his face marked by exhaustion and stubble. "The babies?" she whispered. His eyes flew open immediately. "Beautiful, perfect, small but healthy." Relief flooded his features as he leaned over to kiss her forehead. "2 girls, just like we thought. 4 pounds each. Can I see them? As soon as you're stable enough to move to the NICU." He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Tessa, you scared me. Really scared me. I'm okay? You're okay. We're all okay." His voice broke slightly. "I love you. I love our daughters. I love our chaotic, complicated, perfect family." When they finally wheeled her to the NICU that evening, Tessa saw their daughters for the first time. Tiny, red, absolutely perfect creatures connected to monitors and breathing tubes, but very much alive. "They're beautiful," she breathed, reaching through the isolette to touch one impossibly small hand. "They're fighters," Chadwick said, his finger stroking the other baby's cheek. "Just like their mother." Standing there in the NICU, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle bustle of nurses caring for premature miracles, Tessa felt overwhelming gratitude, not just for their survival, but for the man beside her who had proven that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice made new every day. The hardest part was behind them, but the real adventure was just beginning. Their love had created not just two beautiful daughters, but a family strong enough to weather any storm. And looking at Chadwick's face as he gazed at their children, Tessa knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had learned the ultimate lesson, that love's greatest victory wasn't avoiding difficulty, but choosing each other through every trial life could offer. Chapter 10. Love's True Victory. 93 days after their dramatic entrance into the world, Eleanor, Sarah, and Grace Margaret Walton were finally coming home, and Tessa had never been more terrified or more grateful in her life. The NICU had become their second home, a place where time was measured not in hours but in ounces gained and milestones reached, where Chadwick had learned to change diapers the size of his palm, and Tessa had discovered that holding a baby who weighed less than a bag of flour could feel like holding the entire universe. "Ready?" Chadwick asked, cradling Eleanor while Tessa held Grace, both babies finally weighing enough to leave the hospital behind. "I don't think anyone's ever ready for this," Tessa replied, but she was smiling through her tears. After months of beeping monitors and sterile hospital air, the thought of having their daughters home felt like the greatest victory imaginable. The NICU nurses, who had become like family, gathered to wave goodbye, and Dr. Martinez personally walked them to the car where two infant seats sat ready, the most precious cargo either Chadwick or Tessa would ever transport. "Call if you have any concerns, Doctor," Martinez said, though she was smiling. "But these girls are fighters. They're going to be just fine." Home wasn't the penthouse anymore. 3 months ago, while Tessa was on bed rest, Chadwick had quietly purchased and begun renovating the Riverside Heritage Building, the same building where their love story had literally begun in the rubble. What had started as their professional battleground was now their family sanctuary. "You bought our building," Tessa said for the 10th time as they carried the girls into the stunning penthouse apartment he'd created on the top floor. "I bought our future," he corrected, settling Eleanor into the gorgeous nursery where every detail had been chosen with love. "Mixed-income housing below, our family above. The perfect blend of your vision and our reality." The apartment was breathtaking, soaring ceilings preserved from the original architecture, modern conveniences seamlessly integrated with historic details, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river where they'd taken so many evening walks during her pregnancy. But the most beautiful sight was Chadwick moving through their home with practiced ease, checking that everything was perfect for their daughter's arrival. The man who had once measured success in quarterly profits now measured it in peaceful moments and babies' smiles. "I can't believe they're really ours," Tessa whispered, watching Grace sleep in her crib, so small but so perfect. "Believe it," Chadwick said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "After everything we've been through, we deserve this happiness." The first weeks at home were a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes, interrupted sleep, and overwhelming love. Chadwick had taken paternity leave, something that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago, and threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. "You're amazing at this," Tessa observed one night, finding him in the nursery at 3 a.m. with both girls, somehow managing to feed them simultaneously while humming softly. "I'm making up for lost time," he said simply. "I missed so much with James. These girls are getting every moment I can give them." Watching him, this powerful man reduced to silly faces and baby talk, completely captivated by two tiny humans, Tessa fell in love with him all over again. This was the father she'd always dreamed their children would have: present, patient, devoted. James visited daily, completely smitten with his baby sisters, and endlessly helpful with everything from grocery runs to middle-of-the-night baby-holding sessions. "They're going to be spoiled," Tessa warned as she watched him read elaborate stories to two babies who couldn't possibly understand the words. "Good," James replied without looking up from the book. "They deserve to be spoiled. Besides, I have 28 years of Big Brother energy to make up for." On the girls' 6-month birthday, 3 months adjusted age, they celebrated quietly at home with just family. Eleanor was reaching for toys now. Grace had started rolling over, and both were sleeping through the night more often than not. "I have something for you," Chadwick said after James had left and the babies were settled for the evening. He handed her a small wrapped box that she opened to reveal a pendant. 2 intertwined hearts with tiny diamonds representing each of their children, including James. "It's beautiful," she breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Look at the back." She turned it over to find an inscription: "Love's true victory." "I don't understand," she said, though tears were already starting. "I've been thinking about what victory really means," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I used to think it was about winning deals, accumulating wealth, building an empire. But I was wrong." He gestured around their beautiful home, toward the nursery where their daughters slept peacefully. "This is victory. You, me, our family. Learning that the greatest success isn't what you achieve, but who you become along the way." His voice grew soft with emotion. "Love's true. Victory isn't finding someone perfect. It's 2 imperfect people choosing to grow together every single day." The truth of his words settled into her heart, like coming home. They had both been broken when they'd found each other, scarred by failed marriages, afraid of vulnerability, convinced they were meant to be alone. But together they'd built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate lives. "I love our victory," she whispered against his lips. 1 year later, as they celebrated the girl's first birthday in the garden courtyard of their building, Tessa marveled at how completely her life had transformed. At 49, she was living a reality she'd never dared to dream. Married to a man who loved her completely, mother to 2 beautiful daughters who filled every day with wonder, successful in her career without sacrificing her family. "Any regrets?" Chadwick asked, finding her during a quiet moment while James entertained the birthday girls and their friends. She looked around at the celebration, Eleanor taking wobbly first steps between willing arms, Grace babbling happily in her high chair, their found family laughing and loving in the space they'd created together. "Only that it took us 48 years to find each other," she said, echoing his words from so long ago. "Maybe we needed those years to become the people we are now," he replied, pulling her close. "Maybe younger versions of ourselves wouldn't have appreciated this miracle." She considered this, thinking about the driven, emotionally guarded woman she'd been even 2 years ago. "You're right. We had to learn how to love ourselves before we could love each other properly. And now? Now we get to love these babies and each other for the rest of our lives." She rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "Now we get to show them what real love looks like. Imperfect but committed, challenging but worth fighting for." As the sun set over Manhattan, painting their courtyard in shades of gold and pink, Tessa felt the profound contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Their love story had begun in the literal ruins of a collapsed building, but they'd built something permanent and beautiful from that destruction. At 53, Chadwick had finally learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like this. His wife's hand in his daughter's laughter filling the air, his family whole and happy around him. They had both thought their chances for love and family had passed them by. Instead, they discovered that the greatest adventures often begin when you think it's too late, that the deepest love comes not from finding someone who completes you, but from choosing to complete each other every single day, standing in their garden with their daughters playing at their feet and their future stretching bright before them. They knew with absolute certainty that love's true victory wasn't avoiding life's storms. It was learning to dance together in the rain. Their second chance at forever had become something even more precious, a first chance at the love they'd always deserved but never thought they'd find. And it was absolutely, perfectly, completely worth the wait. In the end, that was love's greatest lesson. It's never too late to begin again, to build something beautiful, to choose hope over fear and connection over safety. Their story was proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin when you think all the good chapters have already been written. The building around them hummed with the lives of families who'd found affordable beauty, just as Tessa had envisioned. Above them all, two people who'd thought they were meant to be alone had created a love story that would last generations. It was, in every sense, love's true victory.